Welcome to Help with Natalie Cuomo, the podcast about a girl who just can't help herself.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Help with Natalie Cuomo. Today is a very special episode. I have in studio with me the incredible comedian Justin Silver. How are you?
I like being called incredible. I appreciate it. I'm good. We had such a bonding experience over Skankfest.
We did.
We didn't know each other that well, and then when we we got into some nice in-depth conversations in the green room. We had some shared stage time with our fucking disgusting DMs that we get.
Oh my God.
That was fun.
It was amazing. Yeah, we both have OCD.
We learned. Yeah.
So, Justin, I specifically wanted to talk to you about OCD because you are pretty open about talking about your OCD.
So much.
And OCD is something that I've struggled with actually since I was in high school, and it's not something that I'm that open about, like the intricacies of.
Right.
In my career or in my life.
Yeah. The way it came up is because something happened. We were in the green room. I don't know what we were talking about. And you were like, I'm too OCD about that. I'm like, I'm like legit OCD about shit. And I remember when I was early in comedy, me and Big J have always been really close. Mm-hmm. And I was at his house for a Christmas. And I started telling him about like all my weird shit when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And we called my stepmother. And I'll tell you these things. Like I tell these things on stage, so I'll tell them on this podcast. But then we started talking. We called my stepmother so she could like tell him all the little shit that I would do. He's like, "How are you not talking about this on stage?" And I was like,
God.
"I have no idea how to talk about this." But he's like, "It's the vulnerability, especially if someone's like," and I'm not saying this to sound narcissistic at all. It's like Big J's the kind of guy you want to laugh at, right? When you see him on stage. With me, you're just like, who's this fucking cocky and shaped prick, right? So he's like, you have to kind of the reason we all love you is because you have all these quirks and things about yourself and you're like this fucked up anxious person. That's got to start to come to the fore. Yes. And that's when like my comedy started really being about like the honesty about like my anxiety and the human condition and the shit that I go through, and then like, sort of the relatable way that I do it, and then shit started to get like really authentic, and it's like that's when I was like I really found my voice as a comic. So it was such like the gateway to be on to like just more honest performance. You know what I'm saying? I
just feel like if I were to talk about I just don't even tell the people I'm closest to in my life about. I can't even really tell my therapist because it's so fucking embarrassing, the things that I tell myself that I should do.
Yeah.
That I can't imagine getting to a place where I'm saying these things on stage because it's not funny. It's just ridiculous.
But that's the point. Like, comedy is absurdity.
But yeah, it's when you bomb like a joke you wrote, it's like it sucks. But when you bomb your ridiculous universe that you have in your head about how to maintain some level of balance in your life, it's even worse.
Yeah, but when it doesn't, but when it succeeds and people,
right.
my favorite, the way I get on stage, like my favorite joke is always that one about like the bed sheets.
Right.
You know
like
what I mean?
That one a lot. Yeah.
So that's always how I start those sets, because it's like, I'm having like me and this girl, like I'm obsessed about like the bed sheets. Like if too much white is showing, I go crazy, and then I'm like having sex with this girl, and like she's grabbing at the bed sheets, and like she's coming, like oh my god, and she's like, "Are you?" I'm like, and then I'm screaming the same thing she is because there's too much fucking white showing on the bed sheet.
Yeah.
So finding the sort of hook into those things,
right.
and make it, to me that was like the most freeing thing, and it becomes like, I feel like all good art comes from pain.
Agreed.
So if you look at like Eminem in 8 Mile, the way he wins that rap battles, he just rips himself to part. He's like, I know all the shit he's got to say about me. And then to me, it was like the most freeing thing, and in turn ended up being like the most healing thing because I can like laugh at all these things now. And one of the ways that they help people with OCD is by characterizing it. Like I go to cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Mm-hmm. I think CBT is like the best form of therapy, and it's not, and I don't just use it for OCD, I use it for like everything. Like it's basically just like mapping out structural ways to go through dealing with things in your life, no matter what it is, whether it's relationships, whether it's like eating disorders people have, whether it's any job stuff. Like that's the way to really go about it. It's the mechanics of the brain. But one of the ways they do it is like, people are so intimidated by the voices in their heads, which we all have, or the demons in their head, then what happens is those monsters, if you're afraid of the monster in the closet, then it seems more real than it really is. And the thing that was the most freeing to me was to be like, yeah, I'm like fucked up and insane, and like, and now I can laugh about this. And then when other people laugh at it, and that's the best sort of praise is when people are like, dude, that joke you tell about that thing, or when you talked about your Twitches, like, you wouldn't believe the amount of people that have forms of that, or at least think they do, or something similar.
Right.
So to me, it was like and I had so many weird fucking things when I was a kid, and then I learned like why they are, which is interesting.
Yeah.
You know.
Before we get too into this, I do want to start because I always like to start by asking, and I feel like it's a good time for the best advice that you've ever received.
You know, on what topic?
In general, in life.
Holy shit. I mean, there's so many different forms of that, but I'll give you something that I say all the time.
Okay.
I'll give you one in terms of diet and fitness.
Ooh.
I'll give you one in terms of, I won't do a dog one.
Why?
All right, remember, I'll give you a diet fitness one, I'll give you a relationships, and I'll give you 2 relationships one.
Oh my God, I'm getting everything.
Here you go.
Okay.
So this pertains to your boyfriend.
Okay.
So Lewis,
Yeah.
years ago, wanted to really get in shape, and he was like, and he was one of the dudes who was like, I couldn't believe like the transformation that he made, and he wanted all this sort of like, he wanted all this dietary advice. So I was like, all right, here's what I do, because like I was not always like fit, I was like chubby as a kid, and I said, once you eat it, you own it. And that was the thing that he said to me. He was like, that was the thing that was the thing that helped him as he was like trying to manage what he was going to eat. He's like, once you eat it, you own it.
Yeah.
So that's that one. My favorite things in terms of like dealing with people and dealing with relationships and being the kind of person who's like a sentient person who has a big heart and always wants to like be the pacifier and things. And I don't mean like, you know, I'm not like a people pleaser, but the kind of person who's like, oh, if there's some sort of strife, let's fix the thing. Is when people show you who they are, believe them. Mm-hmm. That's my favorite.
That's a good one.
And I filtered out a lot of shit relationships in my life, especially over the past few years, where I was just like, it's not that people can't make mistakes, but like when people show you who they are, believe them.
Or the trash always takes itself out.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I like that one.
There's another good relationship one that you know, there's this book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, which is my favorite book by Nathaniel Branden. This dude just sort of nailed like the things that make up an esteemable person. And he's talking about how people date on the level of their self-esteem. And he says, the height of 2 abysses do not make a peak. You know what I mean by that?
No.
Like a broken person and a broken person aren't coming together to make a whole person.
Right.
So I always like, you know, you're like, oh, I can fix that person and then that person and the 2 of us can. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, that's not.
My therapist says 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4.
Yes, 2 halves don't make a whole; they make a whole.
Yes.
We're getting deep on this one.
We're so deep.
We're so deep. I'll give you a dog one.
Yes.
So because you know all the shit that I do with dogs. So
I just overhear Lewis telling you to talk to me about dogs.
Yeah, I could tell you whatever you want.
You don't, but we'll talk about OCD first.
We can talk about OCD first. A good dog
what's
one.
a dog one?
I always tell people this. I say like, dogs are doing exactly what you communicate to them to do, whether you're communicating it directly or inadvertently through your behaviors. So you're always training them no matter what. So when people are like, oh, my dog's acting out and he's doing this or he's doing that, it's like, because you're telling, whether directly or inadvertently, you're telling them to do that. So you're always training them no matter what. So you're either training them, you know, it's like a parent. It's like if you sort of neglect your kid, you're teaching them to be like some latchkey fucked up kid. But that's how parenting works. So that's what I would tell people.
I like that a lot.
There you go. You got a lot. You got a lot early.
All right. Thank you, Justin.
Do you know how OCD starts, by the way?
How?
There's this theory.
Okay.
Did you ever hear the theory? There's something. It's better to be a devil in a world of angels rather than an angel in a world of devils. Do you know what that means?
Elaborate.
Okay. So when OCD happens, it's a distraction, right?
Okay.
All it is a mental mechanism,
Exactly,
right? Like any other mental mechanism. There's a million of them. People get defensive. They have to sort of make OCD like it's bigger than it is the thing that's so ridiculous. It just tends to be funnier, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So like when people go through trauma, and there's like, you know, trauma lives on a spectrum. There's everything from like, you know, really harsh sexual abuse when someone's a child to things that are lesser, like, you know, a parent favors one sibling over the other. There's all different forms of trauma. There's long form traumas where it's like, you know, parental figures tend to like, or someone's in like a long marriage and it's just not satisfying. There's all different forms of trauma. So when people are younger, there's a mechanism, and this is why like children who experience child abuse think they did something wrong. Psychologically in the brain, it's safer for a child to be bad, raised by people that are good, because that means that the world is still a safe place, rather than that they are the angel in the world of devils. So when things happen to them, like for me, it was like my parents' divorce. My parents divorced when I was really young, and then I would like go to my dad's house on the weekends, and it was like I was like scared at the house. I did like everybody else was like, it was like Manhattan in the 80s, and we lived on and then my dad was on 14th Street, and
we both grew up in the city. Okay,
yeah, and the sounds. My mom was in Queens, and the sounds of like the homeless people outside, and then I was like scared of it. So instead of like my way of dealing with it, I started like having these like twitching patterns and noises and like little tapping patterns. And the way that I learned it, I'm like, oh, this is like if I focus on like this pattern that I have to finish, like 1 2 2 1 2 1 1 2 2, then it's like then I can't focus on those other things, and then if it just keeps exacerbating, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you realize like, oh, that's just what that was.
Well, I agree. I've actually had this conversation with my therapist. It not phrased like angels and devils, but essentially like in terms of having like maybe parents that are like angry or fighting.
Yeah,
that it's like either the whole world is a mess,
right,
and I'm okay, or I can trust my parents and I'm bad and I'm wrong. So yeah, I do see, it's interesting. I feel like also it's important to like break down what OCD is, because there's totally a misconception that OCD is like keeping things clean and like making things organized, or you hear people say like, oh my God, I'm so OCD right now, and it's just, for me, it's never been that. I've definitely felt like an attachment to my stuff and the way I've laid things out. Like I've had total mental breakdowns like as a kid if anyone like touched my things, but it didn't have anything to do with it. Had more to do with like these patterns that I created, or these rituals that I had to do, or things that I had to like patterns I had to think in order to like keep myself safe in situations.
Right. I get that. It's interesting. I read books on this. So there's all different forms. There's OCD, straight OCD, and then there's obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Mm-hmm. That sounds like the more severe of the two, but it's not. That really basically is like intrusive thoughts that are bothering you. And I have like, this is really cool. Like my shrink gives me all these like, because we do cognitive behavioral, he'll give me like these books or like these cool things on YouTube. Like there's this thing called like the Unwelcome Party Guest, and it's a cartoon about this guy named Ralph who is like this really close talker, and he's your neighbor. And when you throw a party, like he tries to come into the party. He's farting in front of everybody. He's just annoying. He's just disgusting. He annoys the shit out of everybody. So you try to like get him to leave. So you try to throw him out of the party.
Right.
And then what happens is he climbs back in through the window, and then he starts annoying everybody. And then the embarrassment of being like, oh shit, he's going to ruin this social situation. And the whole point is that it's like the more you push these intrusive thoughts away, the whatever you resist persists, right? So it's we should show it on here. It's like this animated cartoon called The Unwelcome Party Guest. So I've watched it like a bunch of times, and like whenever I'm having like like I've been able to identify the different voices in my head. Like everybody has like that little kid inside of them. Everybody has that parent. And then you have like you have the unwelcome party guest, Ralph. Right. So I'm like, I can tell who's talking, and it's helped me manage those things. Oh, we have it. Did you find it, Mike? Oh, cool. We don't have to watch the whole thing, but you can get sort of like the gist of it. But this is like one of the most helpful.
Imagine one day you decide to throw a party for all your friends. You get out your phone and you start inviting people. You want a really big party, so you say, anyone can come.
Even the crocodile hunter.
And on the big day, you get your place ready for the party.
So this would just be a social situation.
And pretty soon, the guests all start arriving. After a while, everyone you're expecting has arrived, and you're having a really good time. But then the doorbell goes.
So here's your intrusive thoughts.
Must be someone I've forgotten about. And it is. Someone who you definitely did not want at the party. It's your neighbor, Brian.
Oh, Brian. Okay.
Brian has to be one of the most annoying people you know. He's rude, grumpy, he moans a lot, and he's not so flash on personal hygiene. He's the last person.
So we don't have to watch this whole thing if you don't want to. But the point is, like, the point being, like, he explains how he keeps like throwing him out of the house, and everything he does is to try to get rid of this. And then he realizes, like, if you just accept and let him in there, it's not so annoying and it's not so burdensome.
Right.
And so that's like, there's all these like tools on how to deal with this, which just have minimize and minimize and minimize it. Straight OCD, I've learned, is a little bit more complex, where it's like, and I know people who have this, where it's like, they're so and it's not that one is harder to deal with than the other. It's just different forms. They've like, you know, they're convinced that they didn't unplug the dryer. So in order to convince themselves, like, they take it to work with them, and then they constantly have to look at it in the drawer. They'll like press the cord plugs into their hand to make it bleed so they can see the two lines of the plug. You know, like, that's like straight OCD.
I take photos of like the stove and like the door and stuff like that before I leave.
But okay, so but all those things are like, they're kind of like
Yeah, they're manageable.
Body dysmorphic disorder is a form of OCD. Eating disorders are forms of OCD.
Totally.
They're just like, there's all these ways these things just kind of like, you know, there's all these ways these things just kind of manifest. And I think everybody, when people say like, oh, I'm so OCD, these things exist in their embryonic stages in everybody.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? And how severe they get or how not severe they get is, I think, just a matter of like how people are like willing to face them. Like, mine is just sort of like, it's just become like, oh, I'll like, if I go through like a breakup or some shit like there's like the same thought it just goes over and over and over, or some like situation that like I just like obsess about situations to the point where I'm like, why can't I stop thinking about this?
You fixate on things.
I fixate. I tend to like mentally fixate and then overdo it. But there's like positive aspects to that. There's things where that's like super helpful. There are.
Here are two things that I do, and I wonder if this has to do with OCD or if this is just my neuroses, whatever.
Right. And by the way, like, it's hard to draw the
line.
Yeah, where you define one is OCD and one's not. Like, these things are all intertwined. They're mushy.
So there are two things that I do. I feel like my OCD, like my thought patterns and like all of that stuff, it's pretty much under control. Like, but the two things that I do is I will focus on a situation and like decide that it's a problem and like get really upset about it. But the other big thing is I will ask for reassurance. I will ask for reassurance. I feel like it's an OCD thing, and I will be like, I have to ask them if they're sure about this thing like 4 times.
Is it like in relationship stuff, or is it like, you sure you want to go somewhere? I mean, I don't want you to be too disclosing.
No, it's something that I've convinced myself matters in that moment. So, I'll only ask for reassurance to someone I'm really comfortable with. So it would be like my mom or boyfriend.
Right.
They don't necessarily, my mom knows what I'm doing, but they don't necessarily like understand what's happening.
I can't believe that you don't see, and Mike can back me up on this, how like adorably endearing this is and how funny it is at the same time. Because it's like, you know, people look at you and they're like, she's this attractive chick, she's got these, like, you look like a badass, right? And like these are such like human things that are like that's adorable. I mean, I'm
feel
sure
like it's annoying.
But so what? So people are fucking annoying. It's like, Mike, you agree with me on this? Like,
yeah, thank God you have flaws, Justin.
Right. If I'm as fucked up as everybody. I'm like, I'm such a fucking wreck. But go ahead. You were making a bigger point. I'm just saying, these are things that are so worth exploring.
And then, I just catastrophize things as well. Like, that's a total. But I feel otherwise, like, but as a kid, my OCD was fucking bonkers. I told you this at Skank.
Tell me some of the things I'll tell you some of the things I used to do.
In high school, I literally said to my parents, I was like, I literally went to my parents in high school and I was like, I need to go on medication. I can't handle this anymore. Like, I asked to go on meds in high school because my OCD was so bad. Like, I couldn't focus on tests. Like, it was just like, it was crazy.
Did I tell you how I tell the joke about the twitches?
No.
So when I was a kid, and we'll get right back to this. This is just to help you. This will help you move forward here.
Okay.
I'm identifying so that the listeners and Natalie can feel more comfortable.
Thank you.
Justin setting the tone.
Thank you.
I used to make these sounds like, and they would go in this pattern, right? It was 1 2 2 1 2 1 1 2 2 1 1 2 1 2 2 1. Now, if you see that pattern is a microcosm of the bigger pattern, so then that whole thing would become the one. Then I'd have to go
it's actually very smart.
in, out, in. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I would go, So I used to make, my parents thought there were like tree frogs loose in my house, right? I was like, So the other thing I would do is my mom told me that this part of your thumb is an inch. This is how I tell this on stage, right? I got so fucking obsessed with that. I started running around the apartment and I was measuring all the objects of furniture with my thumbs, and I'd write the fucking measurement down in a notebook in my bedroom. I'd be like, the couch is like 72 thumb lengths, right? So I used to get in like trouble in school because I never paid attention to shit in school. So, like, they'd call on me. I'd have a fucking anxiety attack. I start running around the class, like, like beeping and blinking and measuring all the shit in the class with my thumbs. So they call my mother into the principal's office, like, Mrs. Silver, you have to put your son on medication. His disorders are distracting his whole class. She goes, I don't want to put him on medication. I don't want the side effects to make him weird. And I'm like, I'm
already weird.
And that's the way I explained it to Jay, who was like, that's one of the funniest fucking things I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's what sort of like relieved it, was saying it on stage. But like, I had so many weird things like that.
Yeah, that's
and
hilarious.
it's really normal, by the way. Like, things like that are like, in adolescence, like, insecurity is the hallmark of adolescence.
Right.
It really is. And how many people have like supportive parents that like actually sit there and listen and don't project their shit through their children.
Yeah.
And if my kids got fucked up problems, that means that I fucked up or something like that. Like, that's just not. And especially if you were raised when I was like, now everything is like too touchy feely, where it's like, oh my god, do we have to give you a participation trophy for breathing today?
Yeah.
But like, when I was a kid, they were like, they would fucking smack you in school. Right. So it makes sense that like the brain is going to find some sort of mechanism to be like, hey, you're trying to find balance in a messy world, and our brains are just a fucking mess.
Yeah.
My therapist explains like this: like, if you look at the way the brain is, and I have like my therapist is like I was going through like some weird form of this shit when, after my TV show, like I had the dog show on CBS, right? I quit comedy because I had to do that. And this is right when Skanks was starting. So I had to make a choice. I was like, all right, I'm either going to be like talking about the shit that Lewis is talking about in Studio A right now, or I'm going to be like on primetime. And I had to pick. And then that show took off. I wrote a book. And then I had like $9 million Target deals that all fell through the floor. And I was in Los Angeles just like, I'm like, what the fuck am I going to do? And that's like, I really started spinning out. Because I was like, all right, I'm in my 30s here. Like, this whole thing fell apart. I've been away from comedy for like, I've really started going fucking crazy. So I sought out all these different therapists. I was like, I got to find some, like, I need a fucking black belt. Like, if you're going to deal with me, like, you better have like a helmet and knee pads on, like, when we're going here. And it's cool if like you use therapy properly. It's like, it's the best thing ever. It's the best. So I found this dude who's like who's written like books on this shit. And he's like, and I actually had him this morning, and like we talk, we do it through Zoom, and he's in England. So the way he explained it, like, he explains like the way the human brain works, and it's like, it's this primal brain that's got like this. He's like, it's such a fucking mess. It almost looks like someone's trying to build some robot out of like spare parts. You have this like primal brain that's just focused on survival, which is like sex, protection, food, right? And then we're in this society where like we're expected to be like, we have to be proper, and forget about it now with like, God forbid, like, you farted in the wrong direction 20 years ago, you're going to get canceled. Like, it's that it's the most insensitive thing. And so people are nervous, especially if you do what we do for a living, where you're like, I'm going to express myself and be human. So this brain, it's like we have this old computer with this new computer glued onto it, and then it's got these primal instincts, and then there's like this fucking rampant chimpanzee inside of us that like gets rageful if someone cuts us off. He's like, that's a lot to fucking manage.
Yeah.
And it just makes sense that people have the mechanisms that they have. And so learning about all this shit is the thing that helped me not demonize it so much, and just like find this form of like self-acceptance and like almost like an affection for it, which is like what, when you say it, like, I feel this affection for you.
Right.
You understand?
Yeah.
Which is ultimately like when you get on stage, what people are looking for when they're sitting there.
Have you felt like it's influenced your like romantic relationships, your friendships? Like, has it influenced in a negative or positive way?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Which one do you want first?
Positive.
The positive way is in, like, I have this other podcast called Neurotica.
Yeah.
Which is, we're going to put this out as like a joint one, because this is exactly the kind of conversation that I would have on it. And in my mind, the way it's focused on a positive way is like the uninvestigated life is not worth living.
Okay.
And I think like seeking out philosophy and learning about yourself makes you, just as an artist, it's like that's that's the instrument we're playing. Whether I'm doing it through acting or whether I'm doing it through comedy. And like I was a fine artist as a kid, like I would draw. So we're drawing on emotions, and in a way, it's like all it's done is put me more in touch with myself, and I've learned more about human beings.
Yeah.
As a result, and the thing with and Mike just said it just now, is like, thank God you have flaws. It's like I love everybody in this studio. I love everybody at Gas. Like these are like my family.
Yeah.
And I think if you asked any of these people, it's like I have such deep, soulful conversations and friendships with people,
Right.
and as a result of it, it's been because like it's helped me connect with people because I've learned about myself and because I care about people.
Yeah.
It's also the same thing like when I work with animals. It's like that sort of sensitivity to the world is the thing that lets me tap in with animals, and it's been such a positive. Like my mother is an artist, and she would always say, she's like, the creative brain is this thing that's it's like a really high performance sports car where if it goes out of control, it's gonna fucking fly off the road and you're gonna smash it to a million pieces. But when driven properly, it's sort of this like beautiful machine that has all these capabilities. So in a way, I think there's no such thing as like an uncomplex artistic brain, and mine just happens to take that form. And I've learned, and some days are better than others. Like I've learned to embrace it.
Right.
In a negative way, there have been times when, and this goes back to the point of what you were saying. In a negative way, there have been times when, especially at the time that I'm talking about, when I was in Los Angeles, where the way my self-image and my self-esteem was so low at this point, based on my focus of these external things that I couldn't control, to the point where it was destroying me, and that car was so fucking off the rails that I was having these visceral reactions and these panic attacks that when people used to talk about panic attack and people would talk about like anxiety disorders, I was just like, I couldn't believe the level of fear that I would experience just like if I was just going to go somewhere socially. And I'm not an unsocial person. I have no such thing as stage. The interesting thing is if I would get on stage, it
pushes you into gear.
That
where
was
you
the
can't
safest
act
place.
like that. Yeah.
I would never like twitch on stage. I remember I'd be having like these panic attacks where I'd be holding the sink, like trying to convince myself that I was like on this, like that I was literally in the room. And then like I'd have a spot at the Comedy Cellar, and my mom was like, "You have to just get to the show." The second you go on stage, I'm like, done. Like everything just fucking. You're too in the moment.
Right.
But there have been, and in relationships, I was dating this girl when I was in LA. We had this house together, and I was like, how the fuck am I going to hold all this together? And it was like, it destroyed like I think it destroyed our sex life. I think it like, because I was just feeling so not, the way to say it is like my mojo was gone in a way, but like it made me feel so impotent as a human being.
Yeah.
So it was both. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
But it was actually like the willingness to like go inside of it and be like, wait a second, I'm going to sort of face this thing head on.
Yeah.
And then like cognitively being like, okay, what are the list of fears that I have? And then like literally one by one, we would just conquer each one to the point where I was just like, this is like so beyond manageable.
Yeah, it's not something that you can put on a partner. Like it's something that you have to be able to.
Yeah.
It's an interesting. What OCD, I think of it as a coping mechanism. Like I think that's just like it's just a manifestation of anxiety, and it's like a learned coping mechanism. Like when you're confronted with like a traumatic situation as a kid, then something in you is like, all right, I'm creating this way of dealing with things. And that's like my learned way of dealing with things. And now I'm unlearning that.
Right.
Is how I think about it. I do remember like a specific time in like middle school where my mom was like, there's this thing called OCD, that's what you have. And she gave me this book called Kissing Doorknobs. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's like the first book I read. I think it's like a novel about OCD.
How anti-COVID.
Yeah. It's very anti-COVID. But I feel like the first time that I feel like OCD really fucked my life up was I did like the 5-borough bike tour with my mom, and I was in 7th grade, and I had this thing where like I had to count to like 7 while looking at things.
Oh, I have that one. And you have to do a little bit more so that you make sure that the number goes through?
Yeah, so I had to like count to 7 while looking at things, but I'm like biking. So I had to like look at the sky and count to 7. And while I was looking at the sky, I fell over the handlebars and I had to get stitches on my chin. And I'd say that was not good.
You ready for this?
Yeah.
I have this one where I have to close my eyes for 15 seconds when I'm driving.
Oh, yes.
So I do it. Wait a second. So I make sure I do it. I'm like, there's no one near me. I go, what did you Like, I mean, I don't really do it anymore so much, but I'm like, but I've mastered doing it really fast. So if
It's
anybody's ever in a car
terrible.
with
It's
me.
terrible.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is like those things end up being really so manageable, and they don't take over. It's when we're like, if you're embarrassed and ashamed of those things, right?
Yeah.
You're like, fuck, the boogeyman really becomes real. But it's like that's really funny.
Yeah.
That's really funny. It's like, you know, the whole like tragedy being the thing that makes comedy so funny. Like comedy was really the thing that made it like sort of the easiest for me.
right.
But I think you're right. It's like it's a form. There's fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
And like I said, like if I have if I'm an animal
Yeah.
or a caveman, and it's like there's another animal chasing me that's going to kill me, I may just lay down and roll over to freeze, or I may fight back, or I may run.
Or like you're gonna create a ritual. You're like, this is my animal fighting ritual where I say
Right.
the animal's name 10 times and it goes away.
But I'm saying like
it's crazy, but
but-
it's like we're humans.
But I'm saying that's what I'm saying. If you took that animal and then you put this computer attached
Yeah.
to it, it's like, okay, so there's going to be like a little bit of like a meltdown or a bug in the computer. It's
Right.
like that's so fucking normal.
Yeah.
Like being fucked up is so goddamn normal.
Yeah.
I work with this is an interesting thing about this is a cool thing about like my life with like dogs. So I work with tons of celebrities. You know what I mean? Like someone
like me.
like you, but I work with like very, very like high profile celebrities where like I go to like, they send me to like these houses in the Hamptons where I'm just like, these are celebrities who it's like nobody doesn't know these people's name across the world. Right.
Right.
And you think like their lives are all perfect and they have everything. Right.
Right.
And when I'm working with them, because like I work with the dogs, like the thing that I got sort of successful for with this, I'm like, listen, I don't talk to anybody's assistants. It's none of this. Like, get your fucking turn your phone off. If like you're hiring me for this time, like we're doing it my way, regardless of like whether you're the fucking pitcher for the Yankees or you're like number one pop star. Like, fuck it. Like this is like I own this hour with you, and as a result of that, like, I bond with them. And when people's dogs are they are the lightning rod of their owner's dysfunctions. That's what happens, right? Because they're just acting in accordance. They're acting in accordance with the information they're giving, whether you're doing it directly or inadvertently, as I said earlier. So this comes full circle. So I'll sit there with these people, and we have like conversations, and sometimes these are just like billionaire hedge fund owners, or they're like like I said, like celebrities that and then we have conversations about like we have to get down to the nitty gritty of like, well, why is this like this? And it's like, their perfect lives with their perfect kids and this kind of thing, they'll have like, there's always that point where they're like, wait, can I just talk to you and tell you like the real shit? And I'm like, oh, dude, I walked in here thinking like I want to fucking set this place on fire because of like,
How perfect.
how good, like the door is bigger than my fucking apartment. I'm like, yeah, everyone's a fucking mess. Which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. And as like artists and like especially comedians, like we get to just be so like on the table with it, I think.
Well, okay. Can I tell you what my dog does?
Please.
So my dog does this thing where he nips like a little bit
How old is he?
too.
Okay.
But it's like he's kind of playing, but not really.
He gets over, so he gets a
He
little
gets
bit.
overexcited and it'll be a little nippy, which would be fine. It would be fine if he wasn't. It's
What
not.
kind of dog is he?
He's a mutt,
How big?
30 pounds, 26 pounds.
Okay, so he's just like a kid that's a little handsy. Mm-hmm. That's basically what it is.
He is a kid that's a little handsy.
Right. So if I have a kid that's a little handsy and like, but now let me ask you this: what commands does he know? And like, not sometimes in the kitchen for a treat. Like, give me the list of it right now. Like, say the words that you know that if you said those words, he knows those words.
Come here, touch, sit, down.
Okay. So commands are the buttons you push to explain to dogs what you want them to do in any given circumstance.
Yeah.
So if I have a kid that's getting a little hyperactive because a friend of mine came over
Yeah.
and we're like watching a game on TV and we're like, oh shit, look what happened, right? And then
Yeah.
they're going to react to that. Then they're like, wait, I want to get involved in that too. And if I have like a
Right.
handsy kid, think about it. A dog's mouth are their hands. So they're trying to interact in a way. So I
Yeah.
need something to land that helicopter.
Yeah.
So if I teach them that's okay, go to your spot, sit, stay, and I use that command and I proof it. Proofing means that you exercise those commands in the presence of stimulus that would normally trigger them, right?
Yeah.
Which means I do it first in calm environments, then I
Yeah.
practice it more. There's something called the 80-20 rule that I have where it's
Right.
like if I have a bunch of friends over, like I have like a big 85-pound pit bull who's still a puppy.
Yeah.
He wants to be all over them. So I teach him, like, go to your spot, sit and stay. 80% of my attention is on the people in the house. 20% of my attention is on him. Sometimes, just like a kid needs an iPad to watch like a cartoon, he may need like a Kong toy with filled with peanut butter to chew on. But what I want to teach him is that if he sits in that spot and I teach him to stay, what happens is their instinctual reactions to react to the environment, this is no different than you and I talk about our OCD, our instinctual reactions to react to the environment, whether it's looking up when we're riding a bicycle through the burrows or them wanting to nip, if they sit on their hands for a second and I teach them to focus on me, those instincts pass through and they get through them, and it teaches them the skill, and I do this on YouTube all the time, it teaches them the skill of patience, and then that habit becomes repeatable because this is great that we're coming around like this. Nerve cells that fire together wire together. You know what that means?
No.
So there's the synaptic connections in your brain, that's if you look at the Neurotica logo for my podcast, which will come out also on, it's the synaptic connections of the brain. When nerve cells fire together, like I have a thought, then there's a reaction, the more that happens, that pathway starts to get formed, right? It's the same in people and it's the same in dogs. For people to break habits and make new ones takes about 90 days, which is why when they stay sober, they say about 90 days. For dogs, it's a little shorter. It's more like 30. So if 5 times a day randomly, when there are exciting things happen in the house, I say, go to your spot, sit, stay. Then I go and I knock on my own doorbell, and you can see me do this. Like, Mike knows all my YouTube stuff, but like, if you look at the way I teach the doorbell drill on YouTube, it's like the doorbell rings, dog starts barking and going crazy, and then people go, what do people do? They go, stop it, stop it, stop it. So now the dog's barking, now you're barking, so now the doorbell equals barking. So now the next time it rings, it's like, doorbell rings, they're anticipating the same fucking reaction you're going to have. So the way I always teach it with dogs, it's like if I teach them, go to your spot, sit, stay, and then I hold like a count on my nose. I go 1, 2, 3. First I teach it really fast, 1, 2, 3, because they memorize the cadence of that.
Yeah.
Then they get rewarded on 3. Then I can go 1, 2, 3. Then I can go to your spot, sit, stay, 1, 2, 3. And then I can start introducing things like knocking on my door or ringing a bell, and what they learn is, oh, wait a second, I'm sitting and staying focused on Mama Natalie over here. Right. Now there's that sound, then I get rewarded. So over the course of time, and a lot quicker than people think, if you just do it little by little by little, what happens is they learn the skill of patience and they learn to manage their emotional reactions to things, which is ultimately the thing that teaches dogs autonomy. And the reason and the way I learned that is because of the shit that I did with myself as a kid. I wanted to write this book after I wrote my first book, The Language of Dogs, called Everything I've Ever Needed to Know I Learned from Dogs.
Aww.
The same cognitive behavioral practices that I use in therapy are the same way I teach it to animals, just slightly different understanding of like, their facial structures and what they're looking at. And that's
Can I ask one more question?
You can ask whatever you want. I'm on your podcast.
Now, here's the other thing that my dog does.
Yeah. Does that make sense though? And I can show, and I could literally send you this video to show you how to fix this.
This is amazing, and I'm just because we're short on time is why I'm not really responding, because I just love everything you're saying, and I want to
go ahead
learn everything from you. What about that? Because this is brilliant. But what about this? My dog hates when I have sex, and so I have to put him outside the room. But then I put him outside the room, and he's just crying outside the room the whole time. Door.
Okay, so that's sort of the same thing. So I use so what happens is the way this is the exact same thing as when you do exposure therapy with humans, right? What you want to do is when you're in the other room and you're having sex, he hears these sounds, he knows what's happening, he smells what's going on, he's like, holy shit, what's this thing? Like, it excites dogs. Okay. The same way it excites, like, if I'm going at it, like, if I have, like, a woman over and then, like, we start making out and then Brutus starts getting on top of them, they think he's just being affectionate. I'm like, he's about to grab you and start humping the fuck. Like, they don't read it the same way. And I'm like, I know what he's thinking. Like, this dude's, like, down the fucking go. He's like, like, father, like son, let's do it. When you just remove them from the room, you have what's called black and white separation. Black and white separation is too much of a jump for them to be able to psychologically make. Okay. So, remember I was talking about that 80-20 rule? If you have somebody over and he's just in the room, right? And he's a part of the room, and then whatever. And then we're like, now you have to leave while the most exciting thing happening is like, he's like, what the fuck, man? Like, why am I not part of the party? So what I do is I have these tension gates where they can see through it. And before I anticipate that, or just regularly, like while you're watching TV with Lewis, and like you guys are gonna, you're gonna have some like frisky time or making out, you start it a little slower. Like you're like, all right, let's put him in the kitchen and let's put a tension gate up. You know what I mean? The ones that they can see through.
Yeah.
They just press against the wall and give him something that he loves, like a marrow bone or like a bully stick.
Okay.
But don't just do it at the time of that event, because otherwise what it means is the door closed means I'm not a part of the party, and they don't know what their place is, right? So if you just did that regularly in the house, like let's say you're like every time you're working out in the apartment, you put him behind there. He's like, oh, sometimes I go in this room while they're doing something else that doesn't involve me and has different noises and has movement and things like that are fun. So right now you just have what's called too much. When you do exposure the wrong way, right? What ends up happening is that the process of trying to fix it makes it worse because you're going too far too quick. It's like if I go to the gym and I've never worked out before, and I'm like, Harrington's like boxing, right? If I go, okay, for your first fight, I'm putting you in against this 9-0 MMA fighter. Go like. He's never going to go back again. He's going to get his fucking head knocked off his shoulders.
Right.
But if I'm like, hey, Harrington, we're going to slowly train you. We're going to put you in against Dylan, who you're the same size as you. But it's like the chances are that he's going to do well. So you want to set them up for success with exposure to things that do not put them over threshold. Right now, the way you're doing it is putting him over threshold.
Yeah, he's not.
You see what I'm saying?
He's not happy.
But that's why these things are so easy to fix.
Wow, Justin, you are so brilliant. Thank God there are things wrong with you.
Right? Thank you.
I mean, I've seen you train Lewis.
Yeah.
I've seen your stand-up.
Thank you.
You know all this shit about mental illness and dogs.
Mental health. Well, I need a fucking co-host for Neurotica. So maybe we'll see if Lewis will allow us to do that. Maybe we could figure something out like that.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Damn, I wish we could talk longer.
Well, I'll come back.
Okay, come
All right.
back.
This is great.
I don't want to, be a dick holding the studio, and
No one are they banging on the door for the studio mic?
Yeah.
They are. Okay, so we got to get out.
But I do have so much more to say about this, and I'm so happy that you're here, though. Justin, what do you have to plug?
So you can follow my social media. It's at I am Justin Silver on all social media platforms. I got a bunch of road dates coming up, so it's IamJustinSilver.com for all my road dates. Me and Big J are on the road. We're doing, I think, where are we? I mean, we're all over the place. And then I probably have this new podcast coming out on this network called Revenge Fantasies, what you coulda, shoulda, woulda done. We'll have you on that, where you basically tell a story about some fucked up shit that happened to you, and then we get to rewrite the ending the way we wish it would have happened. And then, of course, there's my other podcast, Neurotica, which I've had on hold, but I got to find like another possibly female co-host because I prefer it that way. So that's it for me.
Awesome.
All right?
Well, you know where to find this podcast, youtube.com/Natalie Cuomo. Rate, review, subscribe. Also Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram at Natalie Cuomo _, Twitter at Natalie Cuomo, and the podcast at Help with Natalie. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Help with Natalie Cuomo. Tune in next week for another episode. Find us on social media at Help with Natalie.